Welcome to the Heart Chamber. I am your host, Boots Knighton. Today's episode is incredible. I interview a heart warrior named Paul Fassi. Paul is 62 years old, and at age 53, he was diagnosed with severe hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. In February 2015, he had his first open heart surgery, which included many procedures, which we get into. Then in 2019, he had another heart surgery, which included the Lima bypass due to myocardialbridge. Since then, he's also been diagnosed with endothelialdysfunction as well as microvascular disease. Then in 2022, doctors found that his ramus artery was 90% occluded, so he had a stent implanted. Paul is an incredible heart warrior who has so much wisdom to share. This conversation was so heartfelt from beginning to end, and I hope that you find it helpful. If you do, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave a review. You can go to the Heart Chamber podcast to drop me a note or leave me a voicemail, and you can also make a donation, which keeps this podcast going. Thank you so much for spending your time with Paul and I today. Let's get to it. Paul Fassi.
Correct.
Thank you for coming on the Heart Chamber today. Paul, tell us where you are from.
Well, I'm from Michigan. I'm a Michigander, and I've been in Michigan all my life. I've never really had any ideas of wanting to go anywhere else, despite the snow. I'm not a big snow person. I'm not a snowmobiler, none of that, skier, or nothing like that. But we're kind of in a sweet spot of Michigan in the Lower Peninsula there, where we don't get a whole lot. I mean, crazy snow. As a matter of fact, today it's like around 50. So with that said, it's dry and I can't say green grass, but brown grass is out there. But I've worked full time for almost 37 full years for all Teamster Union. They were in the trucking and food industry, and I had no problem at all through my years as far as going about my daily work, and brought up 2 children with my wife. We've been married 31 years. Her name is Pamela. My oldest child is Vanessa. She is a teacher and 28 years old. I have a son, Jonathan. He's 26 and he's a computer engineer. And so now we're kind of empty nesters here, just my wife and I. But with all that said, getting back, my story is kind of crazy because a large part of my life I was I went through school and I went through, work and played softball and, had hobbies and really felt well. I mean, I mean, at least I thought I felt well. Sure, I had the little aches and pains and whatnot. And until probably in my mid 30s, I started feeling kind of subtle symptoms, PVCs, if you will, the premature ventricular contractions. Kind of felt like a fish was flopping around, and I was pretty aggressive in my health, so I always sought out help. And, they would just do the typical EKGs and echoes and pretty much put me on my way. But when I would exercise to a level like, for instance, if I had a hand shovel a big snowstorm or do a big yard in the summertime, and after a couple, 3 hours, I would feel pain, if you will, not so much angina, because angina, I guess, is kind of subjective too. Some people say, well, I feel it in the middle of my chest. Well, mine was more in my shoulder, my left shoulder. I would bring that up and they basically dismissed me. They always said that at the very most, it looks like I have a mitral valve prolapse and nothing more, and I continued on with my life. 2005, unfortunately, I had a rather bad car accident. A young teenager, she turned into me. Well, she actually turned left thinking that there was time and I had the right of way. It was a green light. And it was before they had the green arrows and all that stuff. And long story short, with that, after the car accident, both airbags deployed. It knocked my wife out cold and it hit me in the chest. I was going about 50 miles an hour. So this is in 2005. And after that, I immediately knew something was wrong in that I had so many PVCs, thousands. Went through ambulance. My son, he was a little hurt in the back seat. He had something with his shoulder or back, but it turned out to be okay. My kids were in the back seat. My daughter was okay. My son, they just checked him out and they released him. They kept my wife for a day and they kept me for like 3. And I went in a telemetry floor and I had like 43 or 4,400 PVCs in a period of like 13 or 14 hours. So while
Wow.
they
That's a lot.
it is, and I would typically have a PVC here and there, but not thousands. And so after all
Mhm.
the CAT scans and everything else, they just determined that I had a bruised sternum in my heart muscle, the myocardium was actually bruised in itself. Was kind of told that things will be fine, things will work itself out, and they never quite did. I had more PVCs in my life from that point forward, not thousands, but certainly enough to be aggravated. So they put me on a beta blocker. That was the first time they put me on beta blocker therapy. Toprol, metoprolol is the generic
Mhm.
form.
Mhm.
And so I continued on with my life, and all was well from 2005. As far as I continued on with my life, worked 50, 60-hour weeks. I was big into sports. And so I would, instead of play them at my age, what I did is I umpired baseball. And I used to do about 100 to 125 actual baseball games in the Little League on top of my 50 to 60-hour work week and take care of my family as well. So nothing really stopped me, but at the same time, I never felt all that well. I mean, I felt okay, but it didn't
Mhm.
stop me. But I felt, well, maybe I'm getting older, this, that, the other, until 2013. And I can recall my 2 kids were actually in track. They're a couple of years apart. They were in track, and so my wife and I, we met them over there and whatnot. After the track was done, I had driven myself, and it was packed in a parking lot. So I had to park, God, probably over a football field, maybe 125, 150 yards away. Started to sprinkle. So I said, well, I'm going to get on my horse here and do some jogging. I'm physically fit. I'm 5'9", 150
Mhm.
pounds, and let's go. So I ran, or I can't call it a jog, but I ran to my car. And when I got to my car, I could feel tachycardia like on steroids. And my heart was beating out of my chest, which was very abnormal. So I took my own pulse. My wife's a nurse, by the way, 33 years nurse. So
Okay.
I knew, took my own pulse. And while it was regular, it was also 180 beats per minute. And I immediately called my wife. I said, hey, something's wrong. It's now been 5 minutes and I'm in some kind of a regular rhythm, something, and I don't know what exactly
Mhm.
is going on. So she says, "Are you driving?" I said, "Well, unfortunately, I am. I'm going home, but do you feel lightheaded? This, that?" And I said, "No, I just know something's really off." So she says, "Okay, hurry up and get home." Got home, and then she took me to the hospital. I was in atrial fibrillation, and the atrial fibrillation, they couldn't figure out why I was in atrial fibrillation. Now, this is a local hospital, and you think the first thing they would do is at least an echo. They didn't do an echo, they didn't do nothing. I was admitted just overnight for that, and they were going to shock my heart because, it had been 17, almost 18 hours of 170, 180. And they said, you can't go any longer. So they were getting the room ready for the shock, the, defibrillator. About 10, 15 minutes prior, because they were giving me an IV cardiozyme, I felt the conversion on my own. So I converted back to sinus rhythm, and I felt great. As soon as the nurse came in, I said, I already know what you're going to tell me because my heart feels like it's like the old 1960, 70 engines where your RPMs was way up and you kicked it down, and I could feel my heart settle down. So they said, well, you're going to be okay and just stay in your Toprol. I then declined from 2013 until my first open heart surgery, which took place February the 18th, 2015. So you're talking spring of 13 to almost spring of 15, 2 years. I very much declined. And my symptoms were getting worse, out of breath, chest pain, syncope. So I felt like I wanted to pass out. As a matter of fact, twice I did, and
Mhm.
many, many, many times close to it. So all they did is up my Toprol that I was taking. They put me to from 100 to 200 milligrams of Toprol. All the while now they said, well, let's just take a look at your heart through an echo. Then they did a stress echo. They said, well, they see a little bit of hypertrophy, which is thickening on the left side, but nothing to be crazy about. So paranoid Paul said, and hey, what if this medication doesn't work? Because they were going to up me up from 100 to 200. And he says, well, there's always surgery, but he never noted, never told me. And I guess I wasn't as curious as I thought because I never asked him, well, what do you mean left ventricular hypertrophy? What does that all equate to? But
Mhm.
it got to a point where I could no longer go on, and life, my quality was down the drain. I mean, and it got so severe. I had 160 gradient when they did the echo on my mitral valve. So my mitral valve was actually getting sucked into my septum, my heart muscle, and that's what HOCM does, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy I was diagnosed with. And the HOCM was so severe that they had to reconstruct my entire mitral valve, the A1, A2, A3 leaflets. They had to shorten them, and they had to work on my aortic valve. My aortic valve was out of whack, and then they had to. What happens is on the exterior part of your heart, it looks normal. It doesn't look enlarged. But interior with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, in my case, the obstruction, hence the letter O,
Mhm.
um, it thickens so much inside, like muscular, that the blood can't get out through the aortic valve to perfuse into your organs. So hence the syncope and passing out. And then the next step is cardiac arrest.
Mhm.
And often, I can't say often, but I can say in some cases for sure that for your first symptom is sudden cardiac arrest. And so you're dead. Or so it was a lot to swallow. They told me I have no options. I have to go through the full sternotomy, and they can't do it here. Well, they thought about doing it here at this local hospital, but they had only done like 2 or 3 of them. So I did a little research.
Oh, that's not
No,
enough.
not by any stretch of the imagination. I did a
Mm-mm.
little research on my own, and obviously Cleveland Clinic, number 1 in all heart things throughout the United States, and has been for almost 3 decades. So I told my cardiologist, I'm going to go to Cleveland Clinic, and he seemed a little taken back, like, you're too serious. You're AMA, you're going against medical authority. So I had to sign like a form, basically to keep him off the hook just in case something was to happen. He said, you're critical. You need surgery today. You don't even need it not tomorrow. You need it right now. And I mean, it just all went so fast. Every day I just kept going downhill, downhill, downhill. So they did this big operation.
Mhm. Mhm.
They fixed, like I said, my mitral valve, my aortic valve. They did a thing called the Maze procedure boots, where they put intentional incisions into the heart myocardium muscle in an effort to stave off or stop altogether any irregular rhythms that would surface, such as not just atrial fibrillation, but ventricular tachycardia, God forbid, ventricular flutter, this, that, and the other, anything sinister. So they did that. They
Mhm.
took my cardiac appendage out. They put a titanium clip in. They did a whole array of things to my heart. Huge operation. Deemed it a success. Again, I was good as far as healthy wise everywhere else except my heart. So good going in. I did the spirometer, incentive spirometer with the lungs, and I did all that. And my wife made sure that I took care of that, keep my lungs strong, no pneumonia, didn't have any really
Mhm.
complications. And about 2 years after that, I never really felt great.
Well, hold on one
Mhm.
second. Hold on one second. I wanna go back a little bit. This is incredible. So, how long? Because I think this is really important. I've been in all the other conversations I've had on this podcast so far, the resounding, like, theme that's tying it all together between all the different heart warriors I'm talking to and the caregivers that have helped me heal that I also
Sure.
interview. The term advocacy keeps coming up over and over again. And I have not spoken with a single person, well, maybe one, where it was kind of a seamless chain of events that got to that person to the other side of surgery. So you're telling me that your local cardiologist made you sign, like, they were like, "We want you on the in the OR, like, right
Mhm.
now." And you're like, I need to go to Cleveland Clinic." Like, that's a really important window because I wanna hear about how did you initiate Cleveland Clinic
Sure.
relationship and the time frame it took to get from doctor who made you sign the AMA to you getting on the OR table in at the Cleveland Clinic.
Really, it was a matter of hours on that same day, February the 9th of 2015, I had the appointment, and when I signed that to release him of any possible, wrongdoing or, "Hey, he released me, so he's gonna be sued against medical authority," I just picked up the phone and I called Cleveland Clinic, and I told them what I'm basically telling you, that I have 160
Mhm.
gradient on my mitral valve. 0 to 10 is normal, just for the sake of list
Okay,
for the
yeah, I was like,
for
"What
for
is
the
the
list for the
normal?"
listeners out there, 0 to 10 is normal,
Mhm,
and I was 160.
mhm.
So I was, critical, not just, severe. I mean, it was life or death, and that's how Cleveland Clinic told me. But when I called them up, they said, "Well, we have to have, obviously, some verification." I said, "Not a problem. I'll have them fax it over from, my hospital. I won't mention where, but here in Michigan, I'll have them fax it over, and let me call them up, and we'll do that right now." Well, they had my phone number, of course, and I called Beaumont, and they said, "We'll do that. We're doing it as we speak." Less than 15 minutes passed, and they said, "You need to come in through the ER now. How far away are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm like 250 miles away. I'm in Michigan, and of course, y'all are in Cleveland." And they said the same thing. They agreed that, you need a myectomy, which is the surgical everything what I talked about, thinning out of my heart. They had to go in through the aortic valve, but backing up, they said, "Come in now," or they shouldn't have given me a choice. "You can come in on Friday the 13th and come in right through the ER, and we'll admit you at that point. We'll do all your MRIs. But there's no getting away from surgery. We'll just have to do it for our own sake." So I said, "You know what? I've made it this far." I was 54 at the time. So I said, I made it this far. What's another four? This is now Monday. So what's another 4 days, right? Well,
Mhm. Uh-oh.
yeah, I had a couple of syncope, real syncope, where I fell in the shower and I hit my head. And when I came to, I realized what went on, had a bump on the back of my head, screamed out. My wife was there, and she said, "We ought to really go now." And again, I said, "Well, I'm scheduled for Friday, at 8 o'clock." So we went down there the night before, and again, I had another passing out while my wife was driving to Cleveland. So this is in the reason for passing out, for the listeners, is very, very simple. The blood is not getting out of the aortic valve to perfuse to your organs. In this case, your brain, liver, everything else.
Mhm.
And this is what can cause sudden cardiac death. So while it wasn't probably the brightest thing for me to do and wait to Friday, it all did turn out. I went in on Friday the morning, and they immediately took me in and did the MRI. They did a CAT scan, and they said, "You're very, very critical." And I says, "What's my options?" And they said, "You have none. If you do not get it, our estimation, and we're not God, I'll never forget them saying this. We're not God, but we would think in a week to maybe 2 weeks left of life. And if I get the surgery, can I look for prognosis?" And he says, "Well, we're a high volume center, which, so you pick the right hospital. We do them often, and more than likely you can get your life back." Well, of course, I couldn't wait for the open heart. But that's just it.
Mhm.
This is Friday the 13th. The cardiothoracic surgeon was away on vacation that does this. He specializes in it. And I'm going to mention his name, Dr. Nicholas Madera. Fantastic,
Okay.
fantastic cardiothoracic surgeon. Unbelievable. He has got, like, I want to say, near 9 or 10,000 surgeries, and roughly half of them, or possibly more, are because of hokum. So he's been there, done that. He can do it blindfolded with his hands behind his back.
Mhm.
I mean, he's the man.
Mhm.
So if there's faith and there's God,
Okay.
or, and I'm not gonna touch base on that, but I certainly was in the right place at the right time, and I found the right person. Had I gone here to a low volume center, things would have been much, much worse because it's so intricate. Remember, they're thinning out your inside of your heart
Mhm.
besides doing the valves. So that's
Right. Right.
it was a big overhaul of my heart. So
But he was on
he was on
vacation, so
vacation.
what
So he
happened?
came back finally. They said, we have a standby cardiothoracic surgeon who has done a few of them, but we really want Dr. Nicholas Madera. So we are going to up your Topril from 200 milligrams to 400 milligrams. Remember, you're in the hospital, so you're going to be watched. And so I was in ICU the whole time. And he finally,
How long was that?
several days, several days. On the 17th, he came back in town and seen me. And then he said, I will do you first thing in the morning. You're my first case. So on February the 18th, I had my surgery. It was Ash Wednesday. So I went from Friday the 13th, and
Ash
to
Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday. And speaking of Friday the 13th, and I'll just add this little thing here. Both my grandfathers, both my maternal grandfather and paternal grandfather, passed on Friday the 13th, different years. So Friday the 13th wasn't something that I was looking forward to in the first place, but here I was, Friday the 13th. Now I'm fast forwarding to February 17th, and they had me stable. They said, you're
Mm.
strong enough, Paul. You'll make it through the surgery. Friday, on Wednesday, rather, the 18th, they did a big, huge surgery, and about 5 hours later, it was completed. I was breathing above the ventilator within 2 hours, so they removed my ventilator. Again, my lungs were great. My heart was the culprit.
Mhm.
After the ventilator was removed, then they soon removed my chest tubes, and I stayed there a total of 12 days, because remember, I had to wait several days for the cardiothoracic surgeon to do that surgery.
Mhm.
Again, he thousands of them under his belt, and I'm glad I waited. I'm glad they had me wait that long, despite the danger of cardiac arrest, because I got the best of the best. However, the next big part was, he said, you're going to feel like you're 18. This is my cardiologist at Cleveland, Dr. Patrick Collier.
Mhm.
Awesome, awesome man, awesome cardiologist. I mean, fantastic. Well, I never felt 18. I didn't feel 20. I felt like I was 70, and I couldn't run anymore. I had to give up baseball. I couldn't work. It was more physical. So I went on disability. I had already worked 37 years.
So,
I'm sorry.
well, I just wanted to ask, like, did you before we get to that next piece, like, did you do cardiac
Sure,
rehab
did it
or
all.
change anything
Did
about your
all that.
life? Okay, and it didn't help.
No, no, the
Okay.
surgery saved my life, and, the gradients
Mhm.
returned back to normal. I was like
That's a
3 or
miracle.
4 on the gradient scale. 0 to 10
Mm.
again is normal. So all that went good. I had no infections in the sternum, nothing like that. I really wasn't short of breath anymore, and I did not have syncope. So all looked great from their standpoint. But for
Yeah.
me, and we're our best advocate, we know our bodies better than any doctors, better than anybody.
Mhm.
I felt just out of sorts. I didn't have enough stamina. If I went to cut the grass, I'd have to stop, a quarter of the way. My wife would finish up, and the frustration, the depression, anxiety all came full circle, where I ended up, not in a nervous breakdown or nothing like that, but really, really down on my luck, down on life,
Mhm.
down to the point where, is life even, why did I make it through? If this is the way I'm going to be, and that, well, give it time, give it time. Well, we fast forward now to, I did this now. I went through rehab, and I couldn't go back to work because of the severity of it. And so I got a pension because I worked 37 years as the old traditional pension. They don't even have them anymore. I was fortunate enough to have over 30 years, 37. So I got my pension and my Social Security. But Boots, I would trade anything to go back to the way I used to be. I'd work 70 hours. Forget about,
Mhm.
people, well, you're retired now. It's not that. I'm a person that can't sit still. And while I was active in, if it's fishing, if it was going on trips, if it was, I just couldn't sit. I just couldn't sit. And I realized I have to at least exercise. So I would do my walks, but it wasn't nothing to the level that I used to. Not even close.
And so, what I'm hearing you say is, because cardiac depression is
Horrible.
real, and I am hearing that you were lacking hope.
Yeah, I went and seen a psychiatrist too. And this wasn't the first time. And the reason why is because I had anxiety as a child that manifested to a full
Mhm.
blown nervous breakdown when I was 30. Right before I got
Mm.
married, I was building a house. I was, planning this, and I was an anxious person. And despite, knowing in your mind, people say, well, just, think good thoughts, just relax, take it all in. It's not that easy. It's not
Mhm.
that easy. And
No, it's not.
I had a chemical imbalance, and this is way back in 1990, 1991, and they put me on an antidepressant, several of them, and finally found the one that worked. And along with a little psychotherapy, never looked back. And now I feel more mentally strong from the age of 30 all the way up until my heart problems. Never felt better. So that wasn't the problem. But then, like you mentioned, Boots, when you have cardiac issues, often it goes hand in hand, heart, head, heart. It's just that way.
Mhm.
I started having crying episodes and things of that nature. So I went and seen another, this time, same thing, psychiatrist. And she says, while it's not normal, I'm glad you came forward at your age, and you're admitting to it. And so many people dismiss it. I'll be okay and try to tough it out. And you really shouldn't. Nobody should do that. Nobody.
Mm-mm. You don't
So
have to.
no,
Like,
and
can
she
we
was
let go of that idea that we have to be tough anymore?
no, right, right. I couldn't be tough. And so therefore I ended up on a different antidepressant, an SSRI, a serotonin selective reuptake is what they are. I take a small amount of that,
Mhm.
and it's like a minimum dose, but it was enough to get me out of that so-called down, like feeling down and feeling unhappy and whatnot. Started living life again, but again, I never got my stamina back. Never, ever, never to the point where I thought, well, I'm going to bring this up. I bring everything up. I'm an advocate for myself, and they basically said, look, your heart looks sound on our end. 2017, 2000, end of 2017, early 18, again, I started going down. This time the symptoms were different. I wasn't having syncope where I felt like I wanted to pass out, but I was having pain in my heart itself, like a grip, like a pressure.
Mhm.
That translated into my shoulder, my left shoulder, so bad. Then that went into my head, and sometimes all at once. And I could take a bullet, but on a pain scale, a lot of days, I'd be a 7 or an 8 every day. I kept going back to Cleveland
Mm.
Clinic, and they said, we can't really find anything wrong. We'll do this, we'll do that. So finally, through all the testing, they said, well, let's he says, I don't know, you had the Holcomb and everything looks good on your echo. You had a stress echo, that looks good. We can go to the next level, which is angiography, heart cath. Or, and I says, well, how about before we do that, how about do a CAT scan with contrast? Could you put that in the computer now and set it up? He's, I can do it right now, and we could do it. So we did it that day. I was in Cleveland Clinic.
Wow.
We did it that day, and naturally a radiologist has to read it and all. So I left on my way with my wife. We drove from Macomb, Michigan, where we live, Macomb, Michigan, to Cleveland. So I got about an hour away from home, and he's got my cell phone number, and he calls Dr. Collier, and he says, they found a lesion that's 50 to 60% blocking your LAD. It is serious. It is
Wow.
serious. I am sorry, you're right again, but this has to be addressed. We're going to have to do a heart catheterization. So we'd like to set that up as soon as possible. And it wasn't going to be that day, but it was within a couple of weeks. I went back there, and it was the special one, the DFFR and the FFR, fractional flow reserve,
Mhm.
IVUS, the whole thing. And they put me in with,
Mhm.
to get the heart cath. And he says, I don't know how to break this news to you, Paul, but you need another huge operation. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And he says, your LAD is inside your myocardium, as what a myocardial bridge was when I first found out. I'd never heard of it. But now, of course, through research and whatnot, I'm well versed on myocardial bridge and hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. Unfortunately, we had to learn the hard way, but go through that. But he said, the only thing is surgery, and that's the only thing that can fix it. And we have a Dr. Pedersen that does that. It will not be Dr. Smedera because he doesn't specialize in that. Well, Boots,
Mhm.
immediately I got to thinking from 2015, I couldn't help but think, I'm born with this trapped LAD inside my heart muscle. And in no fault of theirs, again, this is 2015, so this is very early on in therapy. If I can recall, even Stanford really wasn't on board until about 2016 before they actually, took it
Mhm.
serious and did it. So I'm not putting them on the hook at all, but it was never noted that I had this myocardial bridge in 2015. My aortic valve was messed up. My mitral valve was messed up. They took the cardiac appendage out. They did the MACE procedure. They did a septal myectomy where they
Mhm.
took tissue out from inside the heart going via aortic valve. They had to cut it in through that way. I mean, a whole slew of things, but they never mentioned that. I can't help but think that they didn't have these microscopic glasses, right? They don't see that my LAD was trapped in my myocardium coming out, really. So I was frustrated. I said, why wasn't that ever noted? And he says, basically, I can't talk for Dr. Smedera. I can't, I can't,
Right.
and which is fair and square. But I was frustrated because and scared because a reoperation means,
Mhm.
yourself. They're going to go back into this, and it's not the little going in between the ribs or where they can do it, through your groin. No, no. It was take all my hardware out, and I had the big long sternotomy thing, huge, 8 inches or so. I don't
Yep.
know, big one. They had to take all that out, and it becomes very vascular. That's what they told me. It becomes very dangerous. Anytime you go, on a virgin chest, it's one thing. When you've already had all of that done and you're going back in there, again, I was in the right spot, Cleveland Clinic. They specialize in
Mhm.
reoperations.
Oh,
We
that's good to know.
specialize in reoperations. So that's another thing why, if I was to do over again, would I have had this operation at Stanford? And the clear answer is absolutely not. In that, I've already had an operation, a huge one. They had to take all that titanium, all that stuff that you so well know, and the
Mhm.
plates, everything had to be removed. And two cardiothoracic surgeons were in there, one to open me and close me, and one to do the work. So fast forward to that operation. They wanted me in January of 2020 to have this done. They called me after my the heart catheterization and stuff. They said, you know what? January 2020, we just had a round table with all the cardiac thoracic surgeons. I think there were 5 or 6 of them. They discussed my specific case, and Dr. Smedera, who did my first open heart, spoke out in front of everyone and said, more than likely, I would not make January of 2020. I would pass away before that. It's that bad. So, could you come next week? Come Monday.
And what date was
Um,
this?
this was September. Let me see. I had my surgery October 2nd. I had to get registered October the 1st of 2019.
Mhm.
So this is probably like
Okay.
September 27th, 28th of the week before. Can you come next week? I said, sure. And come on Monday. And again, I'm not feeling well at all. I had the worst symptoms, but different symptoms that, again, it wasn't about passing out or nothing like that. It was just the pressure on my heart. It felt like hardest grip on my heart, and that
Mhm.
I wasn't going to make it.
Yep.
I could feel death. I could feel death. I
Mhm.
felt death on the first one. After the operation, I didn't. Well, I could feel death now. I know it was going to happen unless I get this operation. So sure enough, the PA, the physician assistant for Dr. Smadera, personally called me from Cleveland. I said, my insurance is through my wife, and that all has to be worked out. And God bless Cleveland Clinic. They told me, do not worry about monetary. Do not worry about if your insurance is going to pay, or they're going to fight it, or you could have gone to another hospital. We'll take care of that. Even if we don't get compensated, we need to do the surgery. So I said, thank you so much. God bless you.
That's incredible. Like,
Never,
what
what
hospital
hospital will
does
do that?
that now?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is something that's why I talk so highly of Cleveland Clinic. They've been fantastic. I
Mhm.
love all their doctors and their expertise. And as a result, that's why I'm here. I did the operation October the 2nd, 2019. When they went in there, it was deeper than they thought, the LAD. Often it is. Sometimes they think it's
Often, almost all the
almost all the
time.
time. It's unfortunate, but it's
Mhm.
almost all the time.
Mhm.
I am fortunate, though, that they took me serious and that they did the proper thing and they did not stent me. Because for you myocardial people out there that are listening, do not stent the bridge. No matter what a
Mhm.
doctor may tell you, or interventional cardiac, do not do that. That's the wrong approach. It will become very fragile and it deadly. So once that's done, that's a horrific thing.
You
You
can't
can't go
go
back. There's
back.
no going back. So thankfully, they
Mhm.
were aware of all this and they took me serious. The depth of it, they were vague. They just said was very deep on the OR report, but it was 3.5 centimeters long. So they unroofed me. And again, I had a 50 to 60%. As it turned out, it was 50% once they got in there. A lesion, which still was there.
And can you educate us on what a lesion
A
is?
lesion is a form of plaque, basically. It's almost
Mhm.
a lesion would almost sound like a tumor, but it's plaque formation. And the plaque formation was proximal to the bridge, and what causes that is the shear. And I'm sure you know, but for people that are listening, it's basically the sheer pressure. In my case, nearly 6 decades long of being squashed in my myocardium, aka heart muscle. It's kind of like a straw, where if it's a brand new straw, you can squeeze that straw and let it go, it will open up. Well, over the course of 6 decades, it doesn't want to open up too much. So even whether you're in
Mm-mm.
systole or diastole, it doesn't matter. You're not getting proper blood flow. Hence the headaches, hence the pressure in your heart, hence the feeling of death. You just know, you
Mhm.
just know something is awry and really, really bad.
And, Paul, I'm glad that you're talking about that feeling of death,
Oh,
and
horrible.
it's hard to put into words unless you've actually been there. I've had several conversations via this podcast with other people who were like, "I knew I was out of time." Like, your body just has this way of putting you on notice, and once you've had the operation to correct whatever is going on in your heart and that feeling of death leaves, it's like it's a whole new
Mhm.
world, and I call my life now bonus life, because I mean, it really feels like it is a whole new,
Rebirth.
brand new life than before. Would you agree?
Totally spot on, Boots. That's a great point. I don't know how many times I told my family, my friends, neighbors, everything else, the quote, I'm running out of time. I knew it. I was
Mhm,
running out of time. And
mhm,
even the day before, they give you this stuff too. It's like to clean all your chest and whatnot, scrubbing everything down in the shower before. So I was in the hotel. I was in
oh,
the hotel.
yes.
Yeah, I stayed in the hotel on October the 1st. October 2nd in the morning, it was to go in there and get all registered and get ready for the afternoon operation. As it turned out, it was evening. But I told my wife that evening, I told my wife during the night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. My kids, we were all in this, we had 2 beds. So it was me and my son in the one bed, my wife and my daughter in the other bed. And nobody could get
Mhm.
sleep because of me. And 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, my daughter, God bless her, you okay, Dad? You okay? I said, no, honey, I'm not good. I feel I'm not going to make it. Well, we only got a few more hours till you get to Cleveland. And we stayed 20 minutes away from Cleveland area. So we were right there. But nonetheless, I still felt, even in the morning, I says, let's get there. Let's get there. Now it was more, it's the pain, the anxiety, the knowledge boosts,
Mhm.
what I'm about to go through again, because I've already done it. Well, I've
Again.
been there, done that, been there, done that. And it feel like you're getting hit by a truck. Well, you know that, everybody that's gone
Mhm.
through open heart. But my thing was, I'm welcoming a second open heart, because I can't stay like this. This is no life. My quality was not, there was no quality. So getting back to the surgery, when they did the surgery, they had to make a decision of doing a Lima bypass. A Lima bypass, all of us are born with mammary arteries. They're roughly
Mhm.
the size of maybe your little finger, or in your case, you're kind of petite. I'm petite too. I don't know, maybe your ring finger, say. And they're always atherosclerotic free, no matter what. No, so in other words, you could have so much plaque, you could have so much, cardiovascular disease, that these two arteries, for whatever it's worth, are always unaffected. They are perfect. So their idea was, which was his call. B and I already had, again, the lesion is the plaque, and it was proximal to the bridge. We
Mhm.
talked about that. The pressure of for almost 6 decades, 58 at the time, pushing that blood through, the platelets stick, and then the plaque sticks to the walls in 9 out of 10 myocardial bridge patients. In about 10%, 1 out of 10, it will be distal, which is on the other
Mhm.
side of the bridge. But 9 out of 10 cases, and Rob, I know you're listening. I know this is correct.
Mhm.
90% of the time, it's proximal to the bridge. And that's where my plaque was. No plaque anywhere else. However, this plaque was in 2015 only 20%. So my frustration was, if this was dealt with, but again, I'm going to take them off the fish hook, because in 2015 it was primitive. They really didn't have, I mean,
Right.
did they do this surgery? Yeah, I understand through even Rob, they have attempted it in the 1970s, even as late as the early 80s, or early as that. They've attempted it and done it. Was it successful? I don't know, but they've known about this stuff. But to actually have a procedure that was, I won't, well, as safe as can be, that they felt comfortable with. It wasn't until the end of probably 2016. So this is prior. Again, I'm
Mhm.
in 2015. So they let it alone, and they didn't address it. I guess leave a sleeping dog lie. If it's
Right.
not barking and biting you, leave it alone. Well,
And that's typically how the medical field rolls, because
unfortunately,
it's like, why? Because there's just so much trauma to the body, but unfortunately for you, it
no.
was 2 times. This
So they took
anyway,
so they took the
so
le-
they did the
they did they
bypass.
took the left anterior mammary artery, aka Lima. They transplanted that and grafted it alongside my
Mhm.
native LAD that I was born with. So now I have two flows of blood, like a highway, 2-lane highway now, instead of just one way going through the 50% blockage, which they can't take that out.
Mhm.
I had a two-way highway, which is in all regards great. You say, wow, you got two. Now, it's going to feed the myocardium, your heart muscle. Great. The only thing with that is competitive blood flow. Competitive blood flow will always happen. One wants a fight with the other. Typically, if your native LAD, the one you're born with, is still operable, that will win in almost all the time. So my LA,
Oh, dear.
my Lima bypass, I just had a heart catheterization September 29th, and I'll fast forward that in a minute. After they did the surgery, I recovered, and I went through all of that too, cardiac rehab and whatnot. Still, I'm okay, but I'm never, I guess I'm damaged goods, I guess. They can only, you put lipstick on a pig, and it may look pretty, but
Oh.
but it's still
Mhm.
but it's still a pig. The lipstick is kind of concealing that. So
Mhm.
I was out of physical danger in terms of heart attack and all that. As far as that goes, I was getting proper blood flow, but damage has been done, and
And that competitive blood flow is
it's
happening,
happening now
and
as we
I
speak.
also think your heart is
In the
just
Lima, Lima
oh,
now is
man.
getting smaller, so it's still patent. They call that still opened enough, but originally when first bypassed, it's wide open, beautiful, big, in their bigger arteries than through the best arteries in your veins or your legs. I mean, this is a mammary artery is not a vein. So they're big. Well,
Mhm.
now it's getting atrophied because, again, the competitive blood flow. So my LAD is taking in blood and nourishing my heart, as well as the lima, but the lima is getting narrower and narrower. And they noted that on my last heart cath, which now I'm going to go a little bit further on. There's so much to talk about, but they wanted me to have, because I still had symptoms, not to the degree of what I was before my operation, because I'm leaps and bounds better, but I still have issues of spasms, endothelial
Mhm.
dysfunction, microvascular disease, and I'm still on diltiazem. I take that stuff, for spasms, and I
Mhm.
still feel I feel okay to go out to eat once in a while, jump in a car, go to the store, but I often still have symptoms. So they said, let's do a heart cath. So they did a heart cath, and they says, I'm going to put you with the guru of angiography, again, always at Cleveland, because I can't really go anywhere else. And I
Yep.
went with him, and he was in there just shy of 2 hours, which is a long time for heart cath, and looking for everything. Well, sure as can be, they found a little nugget of gold in the ocean, if you will. There was elusive to the naked eye, even in surgery, was the ramus artery, which is a branch off from your LAD, and that feeds the back of your heart. That LAD was bypassed and all, but was overlooked. The ramus, all was good. That was in the back of the heart. That was 90% occluded. 90% occluded. So they said, we found your problem. We will go ahead and proceed with the stent now. This is September 29th, 2022. So 5 months ago. We found your problem. We believe this is the reason why, you're feeling so awful. And they put the stent in. I'm on Plavix now for 1 year. While it's helped, I still have endothelial dysfunction. No getting out of that.
Mm-mm.
It's still, I still get spasms. At times I take nitro sublingual, but it doesn't really help much. I call it the poison pill, because all it'll do is kind of give me headaches and that. So
Yeah.
I tend to try to stay away from it unless I feel like there's no other straw to grab, and then I'll go ahead and take one, but I don't take it often. But the endothelial dysfunction, according to Dr. Gabriel, and I've seen her now because she is, head of myocardialbridge at the Cleveland Clinic, and seeing her in person, fantastic expert on all things myocardialbridge. And she basically said how much it will heal. Naturally, it won't heal if it was not unroofed. So Rob's
Right.
what Rob professes is 100%. People say, well, I'll
Mhm.
take medicine and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it might buy you 6 months, a year. You may feel a little, but it will definitely get worse, and you will eventually go downhill unless you get unroofed. And once you get unroofed, you have to get all unroofed, because if any branches are still left in there, you're still back in the same boat. So I had a fantastic surgeon, both of them, Dr. Pedersen, that did it. And they assured me, even when I had my last angiography, my heart cath, that all looked well. I mean, there was nothing caught in my myocardium. That was good. Everything on top of the heart muscle where it belongs and all that. But it is what it is. It took a beating. That's what it did. It took a beating.
Mhm.
And the endothelium cells that line the artery can heal, but like Dr. Gabriel said, to what extent, we still don't know. There's insufficient data. And it's just, it could heal 25%, 50%, 75. We really don't know. Or you may not get any better than you are now. We just don't know. It does usually take time. In 1 year, 2 years, 3 years isn't even sometimes sufficient. So for
Right.
people that are had the surgery, Boots, that are saying, Paul, I can kind of relate this. I still don't feel on top of my game. I guess there's some hope that, time is on our side now that we're unroofed. And it was 3 years, October 2nd, when I had the operation for my second open heart. So I'm going on 4.
Mhm.
And again, I'm not going to sugarcoat one thing or say, I'll tell it right from the heart. I still don't feel like Paul Fassi. However, I don't feel like I'm going to die. I don't feel like I need to be in the hospital. I can still do my things. I'm just not myself like I used to be, and maybe never will be,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And that's a delicate emotional mental game, isn't it? Because on the one hand, thank
Horrible.
goodness we're alive.
Yes.
And on the other hand, okay, but I am not myself. And I've been thinking a lot about how, in your case, twice, like I was saying earlier in our conversation, our soul is touched when we have
Big
heart
time.
surgery. It's not just a joint replacement or a ligament, you know, damage surgery where they go back in and repair it. This is like the essence of you is literally handled, and it just changes you, and in a lot of ways for me the better, but at the same time, I don't know if have you seen the movie The Princess Bride?
I don't believe so. No.
It's a great
Okay.
movie, and for those who have seen it, this is the scene I use often, and I'll do my best to explain it to you, Paul, so you can
Sure.
understand. So, it's such a great, like, family movie and such a feel-good movie to watch, but as I'm saying, just trust me with what I just said to the scene I'm gonna
Okay.
describe. The kind of the knight in shining armor, handsome guy that ends up saving the princess is tortured, and the torture scene is even kind of, like, precious. He's, like, laid on a table, and the king orders to have years of his life taken
Wow.
away, and it's, like,
Bring
all it's just this incredible stage of what's the word I'm looking for? Of, like, all these different machines working together to take years of this guy's life away.
You see why you
And
relate to it.
ultimately yeah, and ultimately, he goes and sees this wizard, that's played by Billy Crystal, and it's hilarious. He gets his
I
years
will
given
definitely
back to
watch it.
him, but yeah, but I feel like, yay, I'm alive, yet I really feel like years of my life were taken away because how
Ditto.
like, our myocardium was cut into, our heart was cut into, and in your case, twice, right? And it's hard to walk around with, like, this dualistic thinking of, "I'm so grateful,
But at the same time,
and how much time do I have left?"
I just don't wanna suffer. I'm okay with, you know, obviously, I've been told this too, "Oh, we're all gonna die." I get it, but we're high risk. I mean, and I'm still young. I'll be honest, I shouldn't preface with that because every time you say, "I gotta be honest," like you're almost dishonest. I'm not. But it I wanna preface it with, if it wasn't, and if's a big word, if the dog wouldn't have stopped, he would take go to the bathroom, he would have caught the rabbit, right? If's a big word. But if it
Mhm.
wasn't for my heart, I feel like I was 30 years old. No problems with my knees or feet or back or hips or shoulder joints or nothing. And I still think like a young person. I still act like a young person, which throws everybody off the game that Paul must be fine. Even to this day, it's not like I have to constantly prove because they know my history, but all must be well now because he speaks fine. Gosh, he's so agile, and he's thin and slim and he could still do that. It's not about, we're our best advocate. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the
Mhm.
conversation, this podcast, we are our best advocate. We know what we feel like. And now I finally, but it took all these horrific things to happen to me. Not one doctor ever looks at me and says, "Oh, it's anxiety. Oh, don't worry about it. It's just something that, it's no big deal." Now it's, "Oh my God, what do you think? We want to do this test? You want?" So they're on board, but it's like, God, it was so much to take in and to tell them how I felt until I was taken serious. And that's another thing I want to touch base on. This myocardial bridge is one that just the doctors just don't get it. The cardiologists, the overwhelming majority, do not understand. And maybe in med school they know about it, but they don't study it enough because the vast majority of them can be benign. But there's a subgroup. There's a subgroup that they're malignant. Yours, mine,
Mhm.
Rob's, Perry's, I just can't understand why in 2023 now that we have, so many, almost 2,000 members here, that these cardiologists don't realize, hey, this is a real thing. This can't be taken lightly. And again, while we may be in the minority, without someone actually coming forward and accepting what we're saying and have an operation, we would be dead. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so frustrating. I just wish more and more would be believers. But my former cardiologist, who I of course fired after my second open heart, the myocardialbridge operation, I had to see one here at my hometown a week after Cleveland Clinic. They said, you can come all the way to Cleveland or you can see your own one here. So I went to the hospital, and again, I'm not going to mention his name, nor will I mention the hospital, but the very first thing he did, and my wife was in there with me waiting for him to come knocked on the door. And the first thing he said was, "Paul, one open heart wasn't enough for you, huh?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, myocardial bridges are benign. I don't know what went on with you." I says, "You are so, so wrong. I am so disappointed in that you feel that way." And I basically should have called him, that you're so egotistical that you won't look into the medical books and see us real cases. But, he already had 25 years under his belt as a cardiologist. So, he always dismissed it.
There was no telling
Yeah, and
him.
I'm telling him this. I
Mhm.
says, I obviously they didn't open. I did tell him this. Obviously, they didn't open me up just for the sake of, you know what? I think this is a good time. Let's give him a second open heart surgery and let's go for it. My LAD was trapped so much, being compressed so much. I had this 50% plaque lesion, if you will, and all of that due to the myocardial bridge severity. So without the operation, I'm sorry you feel like that. And I said, with that said, I feel we can't go on any further. I then got up and I left,
Good for
and
you. Did he follow up or try to
they
stop
didn't know.
you
He
or
he he basically was kind of shocked in that, I just, because I knew that we couldn't go any further. He was in total disbelief. I wasn't going to try to prove it to him. I mean, duh, I had an operation. Obviously he's smart, but what made him so dismissal, like, no, it can't be that. They're always benign. No, they're not. No, they're not.
no, they're not.
In the vast majority of them.
I'm so sorry that
So
happened to you.
I've been going through a lot of crap in my life, and my quality has gone way down. I'm happy to be alive. I'm not happy with feeling the way I still feel, but again, it is better than I was before the operations, plural, before operation one, and certainly if I didn't have the
Mhm.
myocardial bridge surgery on roofing. I hate to admit this, but I have to be this frank. If I couldn't get help, I was going to have to find a way of taking myself out. I thought of it. I had
Mhm.
passive death wishes. I thought of ways of, I couldn't go on like this. The discomfort, the suffering, the physical suffering, forget about the emotional, the physical suffering was beyond what anybody could imagine. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm thankful that I got the operations. I'm thankful for Cleveland Clinic. I'm thankful that I had great physicians, and I do not hold them responsible for them not doing anything in 15 again, because it was primitive in
Mhm.
2015. But
Right.
I still I'm scarred, if you will. I'm not myself. I'm not exactly
In
myself
every way.
in every way, emotionally and physically. Yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes, Boots. It's been a whirlwind.
Thank you for sharing, and I hope, while I can't change any of that for you, I hope just knowing that I'm listening, podcast like other listeners of this podcast are listening, I hope that it brings you even just a 1% sense of relief
It does.
that I see you, other people see you. You know, we don't have to do this alone. And even though you have 2 surgeries behind you and hopefully that's the end of it and that you can continue to heal, like, you still don't have to be alone. Even though it's a
Thank
problem,
you.
you still don't have to do it alone. You don't have to be alone in this.
Thank you so much, Boots. You just saying that, it touched my heart. I really, that's very comforting. And with that said, you taking the next step, and I wish you all the best. I know you've gone through a whirlwind of problems too, and infections and putting a titanium plates in you, and just horrific things. It's not just me. We're like you said, we're all in this together. But I want to
Mhm.
first thank you for getting this podcast, asking me on this podcast, and I also want to thank Rob for the wonderful myocardial bridge site that he's a wonderful man, and you're a fantastic person yourself, Boots. And may God be with all of us, not just us heart patients, but maybe God be with all of us and give us the peace and the comfort. And that's my main idea in my mind. If I can have peace and comfort, then I feel I've won this game of life, regardless what
Mhm.
happens.
Yeah. It's like, you're out in the middle of the storm in a dinghy and still finding the peace while in the dinghy and 40-foot waves, right? And you don't have a choice. It's like, well, I'm out in the middle of the storm in a dinghy, so I can choose my attitude about it.
Yes,
Um, and I just want to validate that too. And sometimes we need to just sit in our yucky feelings because we need to allow those to move through. So I think I'm hearing a lot of grief, and that is normal and natural, and it's hard when, like, we find out later in life that we have something going on with our heart, and all along thinking we were fit as a fiddle, like both of us were, and then, "Oh, no, surprise, you have this potpourri of
yeah,
heart
absolutely.
issues," and it takes a long time. I'm talking years
Absolutely.
of
I can't agree with you more.
processing that.
Yeah, so it messes with you, and we'll make this, we'll get this. I know we're way past an hour or something, but it affects the psyche as well. Yes, it does. And
Mhm,
I try my darndest to do and be Paul. I try for it not to define me. Try, but it's a work in progress, and it's a constant work in
mhm,
progress because my symptoms, although they're not as devastating, they are enough to throw me off my game if I let it. And sometimes
mhm.
in a dark, if I'm in a dark area, it can win, and I don't want it to win. So I got to
Yeah.
muscle it. I have to muscle.
So as I close this out here, I want to remind listeners to go back and listen to my interview with my physical therapist, Cassie Fuller. We actually talk about this in depth, the mental
Hmm.
aspects of heart surgery. And I really go there with how I worked with my mental health therapist before my heart surgery and
I see.
after. And it's a very helpful episode for anyone listening. I I kinda blow the sound quality on my end, unfortunately, so bear with me on that. Please, it is such a worthwhile episode to listen to. Even if you're the caregiver or if you have something else going on in life that's not heart surgery, any surgery or health issue is so hard mentally, and the episode is for
I see.
anyone. So, Paul, thank you.
No, I was just going to say it sounds like a something that I'd be very interested in listening to. Absolutely, very entertaining and
Yeah,
informative.
it's really
Very
profound.
informative.
Mhm.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much for
I
coming on the
I
show
appreciate you
today.
having me. It was a pleasure to be on your show.
And that's the show for today. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. The Heart Chamber exists because of you. If you find value in this podcast, consider donating to this cause. Go to theheartchamberpodcast.com and go to the donate link. And hey, while you're there, feel free to leave me a voicemail. I want to hear from you. Lastly, don't forget to leave a review and make sure you subscribe so you never miss another Tuesday edition of The Heart Chamber. Thanks again. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with more stories of open heart surgery and recovery.